right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Compliance Guy podcast. I'm Sean Weiss, and I want to thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a busy schedule to listen to whatever it is that comes out of my mouth and my special guest's mouth during this podcast today. Obviously, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about the business of medicine, regulatory compliance. So we're not talking about stuff that's actually going to light off your fireworks on a holiday, but we will, as always, do our best to make certain that we try to approach these serious topics with a little bit of lightheartedness and try to inject some humor when we can. And speaking of humor, my special guest today, if you could see him, you would know who he was. But since you can't, I'm going to have to verbally introduce him. But this man needs no introduction. My special guest is Kenneth T. Hertz, who is a fellow of the American College of Medical Practice Executives. I have known Kenny, as I affectionately like to refer to him. It's got to be almost 2 decades that I've been knowing Ken. He has been on a lot of the lecture circuits that I was on over the years, and I used to be devastated when I would see Ken Hertz's name on the brochure, because if I had to follow him, it was almost impossible to get people to want to actually listen to what it was that I had to say after getting the opportunity to listen to a healthcare ninja, or what I would refer to as a practice management Yoda. Kenny has been a trusted counselor for healthcare management and practice transformation for a very long period of time. He's been successful working in private and large integrated delivery health systems, and his areas of passion include operations, revenue cycle, visioning and strategic planning, governance, and executive search work. And as I said, Ken is a frequent speaker at regional and national meetings. So without further ado, I want to welcome my very good friend and somebody who I have an absolute affinity for because of his knowledge base, Ken Hertz. Ken, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here today.
Sean, thanks so much for having me, or whoever it is that you described. I may have to go get him from another room to come in here, but pleasure to be here. And it's nice to be able to visit with you, kind of just person to person without 300 other people running around and talking with us. So very glad to be here. Excited to be here, and congratulations on this podcast. It's going great guns, and I just have to say, the title of your new effort, Coffee Compliance and Chuckleheads, is just the best.
Well, I appreciate that, and I know Eric Rubenstein and Jordan Johnson, I know they will absolutely appreciate hearing that. Yeah. For those of you that listen in to my regular podcast on the Compliance Guy, we do have a spinoff podcast show. It's called Coffee, Compliance, and Chuckleheads, and it is a weekly podcast with myself, former Special Agent Eric Rubenstein from the Office of the Inspector General, and Jordan Johnson of OncoSpark, who is a data analytics guru. So yeah, really, really excited about that. Trying to keep this effort going by having outstanding special guests like yourself on. So I guess the easiest place for us to be able to start really is to, and I know it sounds kind of wonky, but I always feel like there's a need to do a history, right? An evolution of Kenneth Hertz in healthcare, because you didn't just graduate high school, go to college and say, I'm going to be a healthcare consultant, right? I'm going to be a healthcare consultant, for the Medical Group Management Association. And then one day I'm going to go and hang my own shingle, right? Like for me, I fell into this. my plan was in college, I was going through pre-med and I was entering medical school. And, when we were introduced to the Harvard Ruck study, that so graciously brought forward discount fee for service and ruined the days of usual, customary, and reasonable, I started to freak out that I was going to come out of school with a $500,000 in student loans. And now I'm being reimbursed under something called a discount fee for service. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to do something that the country really needs. I'm going to get into the law. Wow. So yeah. So with that said, I mean, Ken, can you talk a little bit for our listeners about your evolution in healthcare? Because I think what's so important is healthcare has been the one constant, right, in all of the industries out there. It's like death and taxes, right? It's an absolute that people are going to need healthcare services. And doctors, because the majority of them are not great business people. They don't have business acumen because that's not what they go to school for. Now, some are going back for the MBAs and they're getting alternative degrees as well, but they need people like yourself. So, how did you fall into healthcare?
Uh, Sean, it's really an interesting question. Uh, uh, just to take a tangent for a second, because I like tangents. I, there's a friend here that I met about a year and a half ago who's comparable to my age, older than dirt. And he and I tracked our trails or journey in healthcare. And it's interesting. I fell into it by mistake. Uh, he is that person that you described a minute ago. He went to school, he made a decision, he got his master's in healthcare administration, and that was the path that he took. I mean, he just did that. And so he had an interesting opportunity to apprentice under a lot of different people. On the other hand, I was that guy that they had to figure out how to get out of college. And so there was a friend who ran a performing arts center where I went to school, and he sat down with my parents one day and said, Kenny, just like you, Kenny ought to be an arts administrator, because I was going to be a music teacher. Now, I wasn't going to be good as a music teacher, and I know that because when I taught substitute teaching, I worked with some elementary school kids and I had to play the piano while they sang. Well, I went back later in the year and one of the kids said to me, Mr. Hertz, have you been taking piano lessons? You play much better now than you did when you came earlier in the year. I knew that was not my chosen profession.
Yeah, that's probably a good indicator when people are coming back and they're saying, "Wow, you got better."
Yeah, so I ran symphonies and ballets for a lot of years, and then when I was in New Orleans, we shut down the symphony, wasn't getting the support. I went to lunch with some friends, was introduced to a hospital administrator. I went to meet him. I didn't have a master's degree, just a bachelor's degree. And he said, well, I can't hire you, but I'll keep you in mind. 2 months later, I get a call from a guy on a car phone. Now, by the way, just to show you how old I am, these were the bag phones of days gone by.
These are the ones that came from Radio Shack.
Oh, you got it.
the Motorola. I remember these. So I'm giving away my age as well because I that's why my wife makes me keep a beard. She says every time I shave my beard, I look like I'm 18 years old. So I'm trying to keep people, going, oh, maybe I should listen to him. He's got a lot of gray hair. So yeah, these are the old Radio Shack Motorola T1 bags. It was the black bag that had the little antenna that you lifted up, and it had the phone with the cord. It looked just like a house phone, and it was attached to this big monstrosity. Oh yeah, I remember those. Absolutely.
he, so I get this call from this doc, and it's all the crackle and all that crap. Anyway, he wants to meet me at a sushi bar to meet me and interview me. His wife and 3 girls are there. If you were to say to me, Ken, what kind of food did you not really eat very much of a long time ago? I would have said, sushi.
Sushi.
Now, that's changed, and I could live on sushi now. Anyway, he interviewed me, hired me to manage his practice. I was fond of saying that I went from prima donnas, because I used to work in the ballet world, to prima doctors in the medical field. And I also would tell people that when they talked about CBCs, I would go, is that the Canadian Broadcasting Company? I just wasn't sure what it was. But anyway, so I managed his practice. We eventually sold to Tenet Healthcare. And then I started down the path of working for Tenet. And then I worked for a multi-specialty surgical practice. And then ultimately got into consulting and have been doing that for quite a number of years. It's interesting, Sean. I think people talk about the fact that if you're in one industry, you're in one industry, and every industry is different. Well, yeah, but guess what? Running a ballet or a symphony, which is I also did, it's different than running a medical practice or managing a medical practice, but it's the same. Accounting is accounting, HR is HR. Compliance, though different, is compliance. Strategic planning, all of those things are similar. So, as we'll talk about today, the business skills, the acumen that you have for that is really transferable from industry to industry. And just a little lagniappe thought here, since I lived in Louisiana. Lagniappe's a big word. Little
That's a very
extra.
big word.
I always urge people in the healthcare field to read literature, books, blog posts, you name it, out of the field. Do not limit yourself to just healthcare. It's too narrow.
That's
Much
a
too
really
narrow.
interesting point, Ken. Obviously, I'm a reader. I read, political science. I read history. I read, literature. And I'm talking English literature. Um, you know, and I do that to be able to um, articulate, better in my mind. I do it to be able to have conversations with intellectuals like yourself and others who are gracious enough to come on and talk with me for a little while. But I do it because I'm a creature of education. I believe the day you stop learning is the day that they should put you into the ground or cremate you or put you in a wall, whatever your belief is. So I think that's a really interesting point. We talk a lot with some of the guests that come on the show about blogs and blog posts and where they're getting some of their information from. And one of the things that I always caution the listeners about is just because it's the AAPC listserv, or just because it's the HCCA listserv, or just because it's Sean Weiss's listserv. Now I don't have a listserv; I'm just making that up. Don't take the information that you see on there always as gospel, because there's just as many uninitiated people out there trying to give advice by regurgitating something that they heard somebody else say without fact checking it. I mean, any thoughts on that? Where do you get your guidance from?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. On the one hand, I think, for example, listservs serve a great purpose. I mean, you can go out, put a question out there, get a lot of information. Now, you have to be able to evaluate it. And so you've got to have some basic information to do that. I have an RSS feed that I look at every day that I probably get, I don't know, 50, 75 different blogs and feeds
Right.
and things. And there's certain ones of them that I know that I can always look at and count on that have interesting information. And by the way, some of them are healthcare and some of them are not. I mean, for example, a real popular one is Seth Godin. So a lot of people follow him. It's not healthcare, although sometimes he'll address healthcare, but his information, what goes on in his brain is just boggles the mind. And so I think, where I get my information is I've always told people, check on the CMS website on a regular basis. Look at those kinds of things. But the other thing is there are defined experts in the field. Sean Weiss, if you ever see him, let him know. But Sean Weiss is one of those defined and identified experts. So that's why people want to hear what you have to say, because on the one hand, you hit it straight on with the facts, but then you also have comments about it that are based in real world experience, knowledge, and understanding. And so, what I would say to folks is you got to make sure that what you're looking at and what you're getting your information from has that as a backdrop. Otherwise, I'd go someplace else.
Yeah, I thank you for those kind words, and I agree with you. So I want to start to get into talking about practice management for a little bit. And I know people are going, wait a minute, this is a compliance show, but there is an intersection where business and compliance kind of meet and they cross paths. And you know, one of the things that's always driven me bonkers is the fact that Sean started off answering the phones in Dr. Hertz's medical practice. And Dr. Hertz started to recognize that, Sean does a really good job. And oh, by the way, Stephanie's leaving the practice and she's my coder slash biller. Well, Sean's really good at answering the phones. I bet he could be really good at coding and billing. Sean, I'm going to give you a promotion. I'm going to pay you an extra couple bucks an hour and I'm going to move you right into coding and billing. And Sean's like, well, that sounds really cool. I don't know what it is, but I like the fact that I'm going to get a couple of extra bucks. And, I'll get out on the old interwebs and use my Google search and go to the listservs and figure out what information is what for Dr. Hertz's primary care practice. And then after a period of time, John leaves the practice, who's the administrator. And Dr. Hertz says, well, my reimbursements have never been better with Sean as my coder and my biller. I bet if I offer him $5 an hour more, which is $10 an hour less than what I'm paying John, he'll be my new administrator. And I know I'm kind of being facetious about it, right? And I'm kind of, making light of it. But that's the fact. People are matriculating up through the ranks without oftentimes being provided the training and education and requisite skills. So speak to that a little bit. And what is it that providers need to be doing to ensure that they get the right people in the right positions?
It's absolutely right. And on the one hand, perhaps a little facetious, and on the other hand, not at all. particularly, Sean, as you well know, in the smaller practices, 1, 2, 3 doc practices, you see that a lot. And on the one hand, I applaud that. It's a great opportunity for somebody to come into the practice, to grow with the practice. Now, the responsibility that the practice has, that the provider has, and by the way, this goes not just for this situation, but for every situation. I've always believed that um, leadership, management, the owners of a practice have the responsibility of growing the people that work for them and with them, their followers, if you will. So, in a smaller practice, that provider has the responsibility of ensuring that at each step of the way, um, Mary or Sean, whomever, gets the training that they need. Now, that's an investment. Now, some providers say to me, well, as soon as I do that and I get Sean some education, well, guess what? He's leaving the practice because he's going to get paid more someplace else. My response to that is, doctor, um, that may not be such a bad thing, because there are a couple of benefits here. Number one, if Sean does leave, Sean's going to say, that Dr. Hertz, long-haired hippie with a big long beard, but he's not a bad guy. He trained me, he helped me get educated, he helped me grow. I think it's a great place to work. Well, guess what? Sean's going to send good people to the practice.
Absolutely.
So even and then in big, larger practices, it's the responsibility of the administrator um, to ensure that there is education provided for middle management, if you will, and it happens in lots of different ways. Some administrators, Sean, actually do book clubs, so they get their leadership team, and they'll, like Quint Studer's Hardwiring Excellence. They'll take a book like that, go chapter by chapter by chapter by chapter, and work with the employees. So, I've certainly seen that happen. I've seen it be successful with the education and training, and I've seen it be unsuccessful where it kind of follows the Peter principle. You're up to your highest level of incompetence. Just because you can code doesn't mean that you can manage. And by the way, managing is different than leading. So
Absolutely.
those are two distinctions there.
Yeah. You know, that's a tremendous point, and I've actually talked about that in some of the lectures that I've given over the years, is that, there's an inherent difference between managing something and leading people. We manage a process. We don't manage people. We lead people, and we lead
Exactly.
people. Yeah, we lead people by example. We lead people through initiative, through, like you said, it's really interesting. About 2.5, 3 years ago, we put a new CEO into place, and we did it internally. Our partners said, our current CEO has hit the point in his life where, he wanted to take a step back. He became chairman of the board, which was a wonderful thing for us because he's such an intelligent, great human. And I talk about Paul King a lot, right? Paul King was the CEO of our company, and he's now the chairman of the board. And with Paul has never managed anything. Paul was one of these that was born a leader. He learned how to perfect his craft and how to perfect his skills of communication and humility and empathy and, being a tremendous listener. But Paul's never managed a person in his life. And I think that's such a key point that you brought up, because too many people, when they get a title of manager, for whatever reason, they believe as a manager, I have to manage people. And that's wrong. You manage a process, you lead people.
Exactly. And the unspoken but limiting factor there is you can only be a leader if you have followers.
That's true. That's true. But you can
And
always lead yourself, right?
well, maybe, but I've seen some people that don't do that so well.
Yeah. Yeah. But what I was going to say to you is that book club thing that you were talking about. I wouldn't really say we have a book club internally, but our CEO, who's been in place now for a few years, Gene Good, and I know you've had an opportunity to talk to Gene and meet Gene, and Gene's one of these just brainiacs, right? He's an attorney, he's a CPA, he's an accomplished, practice management, you know, uh, uh, professional. But Gene is big into, these books on leadership and these books on managing process and these books on, you know, the human, the human spirit and, the way that we process things. And, the first book or two that he sent out, I was kind of like, I don't have time to read this. I got to go read How to Conduct a Fraud Investigation or something like that. I needed to read the latest release of the Federal Register. I don't have time to read something so hokey. And it wasn't until Gene on one of our calls with some of my other partners said, "So Sean, what did you think about the book?" And I went, "What book?" And that was the moment that I knew I needed to start reading those books that he was sending out. So now I read them, and I try to retain as much as I can amongst all the other stuff that I have. But we kind of laugh about it. But one of the things that Gene sent out, which I think all practice managers, administrators need to be able to understand how to conduct it, is a SWOT analysis. Too many people, and to me, I think, what do you think about that? I think a SWOT analysis is more of an art than it is anything else, because no two practices are the same. No two hospital systems are the same. No two integrated delivery health systems are the same. There are certain mechanics that are, that provide similarities, right? But organizations don't just make decisions. Decisions are made by people. So, for me, when I hear about all these people transitioning into the healthcare industry, and they're coming from banking and finance, or they're coming from a trucking company, or they're coming from distribution, I try to explain to them, healthcare is like an octopus. It's got so many tentacles on it, and they go in so many different crazy directions. It's easy to become overwhelmed. So here are some basics for you to first start to focus on before you try to go down that road of being an effective leader. And I think one of them is mastering the SWOT. Can you talk a little bit about the SWOT analysis and really what practice managers need to be focusing on as part of a SWOT, and why we do these analyses?
Yeah, I would be happy to. Let me just go on a very quick little tangent. Again, I'm a tangential kind of guy. So when I was running or managing the ballet in Atlanta, we were fortunate to have McKinsey and Company do a lot of pro bono work for us. And my hue and cry for all those years was, look, you guys don't understand. I mean, you work with all the big intergalactic companies. We're just a little ballet company. And they said to me, you don't understand a lot of these principles, foundational, go from industry to industry to industry. The SWOT analysis. So I typically call it a toes analysis.
Okay.
And so I turn it inside out, upside down, or backwards, whichever way it is. Strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. Strengths and opportunities are internal. Typically, practice is pretty good at taking a look at strengths and opportunities. It's not so good at looking at threats and there. Practice is good at strengths and weaknesses, not so good at threats and opportunities. And so that's why I had somebody say to me years ago when I first started managing a practice, and he said to me, no matter what you do, you got to keep looking outside the practice. You got to keep seeing what's going on in the world out there. Otherwise, you're going to miss it and you're going to get screwed. And so the SWOT analysis, toes analysis, whatever it is, you've got to be able to take a realistic view of what your strengths, your weaknesses are internally, and you need to be able to look at all of it and then to look at the threats and opportunities externally, because your practice doesn't grow internally, it grows within an environment. The same way the SWOT analysis serves as kind of the foundation for what then becomes creating a vision, creating a strategic plan. So you've got to be able to do that first. Sean, this is perhaps a bias of mine. I think there are some practice administrators or leaders who can conduct a SWOT analysis effectively. I think there are others who find it difficult to do that. When you're conducting that, if you're the practice administrator, you can't really participate in it. You've got to be the facilitator. It's really hard for a civilian to do that. Sometimes it's really even harder if you have a physician leader try and do it. So sometimes I'll talk to a practice about, you can do the SWOT analysis, but maybe it's part of the vision and strategic plan. And so to that extent, maybe you want to look at a facilitator, but the ability to do that analysis is critical. It's foundational to all the decisions that you make.
Yeah, and I think you did a really nice job of breaking it down to help people to understand that, the strengths and the weaknesses are all of those that are internal. Those are all things that we can look at to improve our operations, right? And we could talk about operational improvement and some of the things that you would recommend folks doing. But I agree with you. I think always looking externally, looking outward to see what opportunities exist for growth, whether it's a satellite, whether it's bringing on non-physician practitioners, whether it's adding a new physician to the group, whether it's, expanding our technology in the practice to where now maybe we're putting in place a kiosk system for patients to be able to check in and check out or whatever they use them for.
Yep.
I think those are really neat opportunities. The threats, who's moving into the area, who's merged, because I honestly believe that the one doctor, three doctor practices, for the next period of time are going to struggle because I'm seeing the consolidation. I'm seeing providers joining larger groups. Now, I'm not talking about acquisitions by health systems or hospitals, right? You and I have been around, for a lot of years, where we could go back and we could talk about the tenant physician services and the HCA physician services and the med partners and PHI-Cors and all of these different groups who ran around the country trying to buy up all these specialists. And then obviously with MIPS and MACRA, it happened again with everybody trying to become the gatekeepers and acquire all these primary care practices. But again, healthcare is so broken. It really is. It's so broken. And we could talk about reimbursements and mechanisms that are deployed by the payers for things like that. But you know, the hospitals and the health systems have gone through another divestiture of their providers, especially the non-producing providers in those groups. And some of them have tried to go out and hang up a shingle and create, Sean Weiss MD PC, PLLC or whatever they're creating, only to find out that this ain't an easy go. And we're seeing these 1 doctor, 2 doctor, 3 doctor, 4 doctor, 5 doctor groups now trying to become part of these 10 doctor, 15, 20, 25 doctor groups. Are you seeing the same thing, Ken?
Yeah, and it's interesting, Sean, because as they come together, there are a slew of issues that they have to consider. Culture being perhaps the most critical one that really isn't talked about until after they come together. And then 3 or 5 years down the road, they give me a call and they say, Ken, I wonder if you could come in and help us. We're a group of 23 physicians that came together from 7 different groups. And well, we're still operating like 7 different groups. I don't know what happened, but there's a lot of stress and tension now. And so that whole cultural thing is a real issue. And that's where Sean, who was promoted up the ladder in my practice, never learned about that. That's where reading about culture, reading about change, reading about transformation. There's a new book that came out about General Electric and talks about how it failed. Now, that's certainly not in the healthcare industry, but it's a very cautionary tale that administrators, leaders ought to be looking at. So, we're seeing that, but it's not always done well. There's an amount of due diligence that has to be done. It's like I went to a surgeon who did some x-rays on my neck and he said, well, you got some cervical spinal stenosis. And I said, Mark, what are the options? He said, well, we could operate now, or you could try some injections or this or that. I said, I'll do the injections. He said, okay, you can do the injections now. He said, but you'll come back to me. You'll need the surgery. And so you can do the due diligence up front. You can find out about the cultural similarities and differences and understand what it'll take or not, and just say, we're going to come together. It's okay. We're going to do this. And then 5 years down the road, you still will not be fully integrated and combined. And you know what? The staff suffers. The providers are not happy. And guess who really suffers? The patients.
Absolutely. And you used a great term, due diligence. I do a lot of M&A work on the regulatory compliance side, right? And I leave the finance and accounting stuff, that due diligence piece to the management consultants, and I let the lawyers look at the structural formations and things like that. But the one thing that I always push out there to the potential parties engaging in a merger or acquisition is why are we not sitting around the table and talking about our philosophical beliefs on how a practice is supposed to be run? Why are we not sitting down and look, we could talk about coding and billing and documentation and modifiers and all that stuff all day long. We can talk about policies and procedures all day long. And those are things that can be cured through documents, through a change in process. But we can't change the process to something that actually works unless I know that we're going to have buy-in from leadership across the board. And it's, I have a group right now, and I know they listen to my podcast, so I want to be careful with what I say. But, they went out and they brought in 4 different provider groups from around the local area because they felt like if we came together and there was power in our group to be able to go back to the payers and say, none of us are participating now. And now your patients, your beneficiaries are going to have to drive an hour to 2 hours to get care from this type of specialty group. It's going to put a lot of pressure on you guys to play ball with us. Well, it worked. The payers came back to the table and said, okay, you're right. You service all of the covered lives in this area, and they're a major specialty. So we're going to play ball with you guys. And everybody was happy because now we went from, 90% of RBRVS to 120% or 150%, whatever it was. But once everybody got past the initial, oh, we're going to make more money, everybody started shrugging their shoulders and said, well, we still don't like each other. What are we going to do? And this, I guess my point is, you never really know somebody until you get into bed with them and you spend a lot of time there with them. I mean, courtships, you could do all of the things that you want during a courtship and still not truly know who the person is that you're embarking on your life's journey with, right? That's why we have so many divorces. But to not even broach the topic of philosophical beliefs in how you lead your employees. Is it okay to engage in a friendship with your employees? Is it okay to go out to dinner with them, to have lunch with them, to engage with them on their personal time? I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a call from somebody who says, I always had a nice friendship with the doctor and I thought it was a friendship and it just, it seems to have gone too far for me. And now it turns into this entire nightmare because, the partners didn't take a look at the history of how this provider interacts with his or her staff. I know I went on a little bit long there, but I mean, hopefully I was making some kind of salient point.
Oh no, I think it was not only salient but significant, and the landscape has numerous examples of that. One group I work with currently, and I've worked with for several years, came together like that, 3 groups, and they looked at some things, but not a lot of other things. There were several contentious items. One of the groups would pay significant holiday bonuses to their staff, like to their RN,
Absolutely.
surgeon, their RN. And some of them would pay it out of their personal pocket. When you talked then in a group and said, the group's policy is X, and the doctor says, well, I'm paying it out of my own personal pocket. What do you care? Well, then you have to have that conversation. So, no, I think what you addressed, Sean, is critical. I worked with 3 urology groups that wanted to come together. One group was hardworking, dedicated, patient called up at 4 o'clock and said, I need to see the doctor, send them in. And they worked 5 days a week. They did well financially. They worked together as a team. The other group that they wanted to connect with, at 4 o'clock, they told their nurses, no more patients today. And one of the docs took off every Wednesday because, well, he had to go do his laundry and get his car washed. And that kind of thing. So after I did the due diligence on that, I sat down with them and I said, this would be a serious mistake if you three groups came together. They chose not to. Good decision. I worked with several OB-GYN practices in the Southeast, had the same conversation. There were also issues, by the way, Sean, with relationships in the group. One of the practice managers was in a relationship with one of the doctors.
Yeah.
Now, they were both single, so it was okay, and they were going to have that manager become the administrator for the three combined groups. I said, I don't think so. And they said,
never a good idea.
Well, why not? So now I recommended to them that they not come together. They said, thank you very much, Ken. If we need you, we'll call you. They came together. 3 to 5 years later, they were broken apart again. So what you say is significant, salient, and critical, and can be a limiting factor. I mean, why wouldn't you have those conversations? I mean, you're not going to marry somebody without having conversations about, do you like kids? Do you want to have kids? There are all sorts of conversations that you need to have up front. Failure to do so, frankly, in my opinion, malpractice.
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned over my career is that a lot of physicians don't have these conversations because they're conflict avoidant, right? They don't want to get into a difficult conversation. And I always try to explain to them, you're either going to have that difficult conversation on the front end or you're going to have it on the back end. Because if you walk down the aisle and you say, I do, it is very hard to break these kind of relationships apart. Because if you start forming real estate holdings, if you create a holdings company, if you start making all of these investments into the different equipment in the organization, if you're going out and you're acquiring a CT scanner or you're acquiring an MRI, depending on if you're an orthopedic group, these are not, pay $99 and get a divorce in 30 days. It doesn't work that way. And I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, consulting fees, dissolution agreements, who's going to acquire what assets need to be sold, because none of the 3 or 4 or 5 partners alone has the equity to be able to take on the financial responsibility of this, this equipment. So, I think to end this part of the conversation, I think the key is you got to have the conversation. As uncomfortable as it may be, make it like a Band-Aid. Just rip it off and lay it all out there on the table. Have open, honest communications. Because if you get to the point where you say, yeah, there's just too many what ifs, too many I'm not certains, it's better to walk away and live to fight another day than to come together and fight every single day and destroy your reputations, destroy your finances, destroy your credibility, your reputation. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, again, what you say is so accurate and spot on. The thing is that if your mission, vision, values, and culture don't align, it ain't going to work, even if it's for financial reasons. You know, we were talking earlier, Sean, you and I, before the podcast, about books and what are we reading. I would insert right here that there's a series of books, Crucial Conversations, Crucial Accountability, and Crucial Confrontations. Because I think you're exactly right. Physicians are very deferential, very confrontation averse. And so those three books, you talked about Gene sending out books to you all. As a practice administrator, would regularly send out books to the docs in the practice and say, let's read them, let's talk about them. I have a friend in San Antonio who took his board through several John Maxwell leadership books as again kind of like a book club. So yeah, what you said is absolutely spot on. It is far better to walk away, because as we set up these M&As, the divorce is always much harder than getting together. The getting together it's not easy, but it's easier. But the divorce is like, on the other hand, when you get married, getting a divorce sometimes is a whole lot easier than the getting married was. So yeah, spot on. Absolutely agree with you.
Yeah. And I love the fact you brought up John C. Maxwell. He's got a great series of leadership books and books on building your skills. I've always been a big Maxwell fan. I also like Stephen Covey. Read a lot of his books. There's a book that I started reading, and I can't think of the author right now, but it's Best Practices Are Stupid. And I gotta tell you, when I first picked it up, I was like, well, I mean, we always talk about modeling things after best practices, right? Best practices. And then I started looking at, the gist of what he was saying about, are best practices truly best practices, or are they really self-serving and they're only best practices for the individuals that they're actually working for? Because how many times have you taken something that was considered to be a best practice by somebody else and you've tried to institute it into your life and what you're trying to accomplish and do, only to fail miserably? So the title of his book again was Best Practices Are Stupid. And it's a quick read. It was really good. I enjoyed it. I'll try to figure out who the heck the author is, and I'll put it into the footnotes of the podcast. Any other books that you're reading right now, Ken, or are you just trying to stay current on all the client stuff that you have going on?
Well, just as an aside, best practices are stupid. It's always fascinating to me when you get a call and somebody says, well, we're a 12-person orthopedic group. What's the best compensation plan for us?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it depends. No. There must be a best one for a 12-doctor group. I think Sean, there are lots of interesting books, again, out of the field. So book called Essentialism, book called Effortless, interesting books about working and focus and how we approach different things. Again, I just, to your point earlier, you read a broad range of things, and I think that's our obligation. It's our responsibility to read and understand, not the least of which is it helps us to communicate verbally, to communicate in writing, that's a critical part of who we are,
Yeah.
and what we do.
Yep. And I just figured out, it just popped into my head. Stephen Shapiro. Stephen M. Shapiro is the author of the book that I was talking about. Best practices are stupid. You brought up an interesting topic, and I think this is one that is always creating headaches for administrators, managers, for physician leaders, and for the physicians in the group, and that's compensation modeling. Because I don't know that there's any one model that fits all. And one of the groups that you used to work for a good period of your professional career, the Medical Group Management Association. I remember when I started doing physician compensation modeling, there was a book that I took a look at, and it was called The Physician Compensation Models for Aligning Financial Goals and Incentives. I know that's a whole lot of words, and it's really interesting because about 11 years ago, I want to say 10 or 11 years ago, they released the second edition of that book. I think it was like 2002. I haven't seen one since, but to me, that was always a great book. Again, if you're looking for something, it's called the Physician Compensation, the Models for Aligning Financial Goals and Incentives. There's the first edition and the second edition. And then, there's another really good book that I like. There's two other books that I really like out there. One is called Taming the Compensation Monster, by Beth Carroll. That's a really good book. And then the other book, and I apologize because I can't think of who the author is off the top of my head right now, and I could try to figure it out if I can. I know who wrote this book. It's my buddy. Physician Hospital Alignment and Compensation Models is the name of the book. Again, it's Physician Hospital Alignment and Compensation Models. And I can't believe I didn't remember who wrote the book. It's my very good friend Max Reibold. And Ken, Max Reibold as well.
Yep.
From the Coker Group. One of my favorite people to do business projects with. Just such a good guy. His son Mark is in practice with him as well. And I will tell you, it is a very good book. So for those of you who reach out to me on a regular basis and say, "Hey, what's on your reading list, and what's on the reading list of your special guests?" I had one person, kind of a funny message that I got, and I thought they were being funny, but they probably were being serious. the the individual said, "Hey, I was a little hesitant to ask you what's on your reading list because it seems like you're so simplistic at times. It could be words by numbers." And I was like, "What?" And I kind of ha, and I sent her back some books with that I was kind of engaged with, and I thought they would make some interesting reading for her, including some of the books by Shakespeare. Never heard back from her, but I thought she was joking at first, but maybe she wasn't. I guess I am kind of simplistic at times. But listen, my friend, we have reached a whole hour, and I could keep going and going and going, because talking to you is just such a joy. It's such a pleasure. And we can continue this after the recording is done for today's podcast. But let me go ahead and say, Kenny Hertz, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. I can't thank you enough for taking time out of what I know is always a busy schedule for you with doing the kind of work on strategic planning, operational improvements, compensation plan designs, marketing, conflict resolution, leadership. You're just such a well-versed, well-rounded healthcare professional. And you're a good guy, and you've been a good friend over the years. And I can't tell you how much it means to have you on the show. I know we had an opportunity to kind of go off on some different tangents because you're just a tangential kind of guy. Um, but I really do hope that the listeners of today's podcast enjoyed our conversation today as just half as much as I did. And I definitely want to make sure that you're always welcome back on the podcast anytime because I think we're just barely scratching the surface with some of these practice management issues and things that we could definitely go off on other tangents about.
Been my great pleasure, Sean. Always great to visit with you, albeit virtually today. But it's just great fun. It's something I enjoy talking about, and it's great because you as well have such a breadth of experience and knowledge in this area. It's fun to talk about and explore so many of the things that are happening in our rapidly changing field. I'd certainly offer to answer, any questions, Sean, that your listeners have. They want to shoot you an email, be happy to do that. I would also, if it would be useful, I'll put together a list of 8 or 10 books and send it over to you so you can include it in the footnotes of the podcast. And it would be my great honor and pleasure to come back and visit with you for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely send me that list and we'll get it up on our resources page and we'll make sure we include it in the footnotes of this podcast presentation for everybody. All right. So, as I said, this brings us to the end of our podcast with Mr. Kenny Hertz. I hope y'all have enjoyed the time that we've been able to spend together. We will be back in the next week with another special guest, David Zetter of Zetter Consulting, and he is the president of the NSC HBC. Really looking forward to having that conversation with David. We'll get that up in the next couple of weeks. And thank you so much for tuning in. And we look forward to having you join us on another podcast. Take care.